Hello, everyone. Thank you if you just joined us. We're just going to give 10 more seconds for people to dialing in since you are logging in. So we'll just wait for 10 more seconds and then we will get started. Cool. I think we're good to go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar, Safeguarding Reputation Capital Amid Growing Cyber Threats, the role of PR and comms teams before, during, and after a cyber attack. My name is Rashid Abubakar. I'm an Associate Director at Sandpiper Communications. Together with the Public Relations and Communications Association Southeast Asia, most of us know them as PRCA. I would like to thank you for joining us in today's session. Cyber attacks are now occurring with record-breaking frequency, costing the global economy trillions of dollars and having a long-lasting impact on corporate reputation. With more employees working remotely and a huge increase of personal data being shared digitally, cybersecurity is so important for all organizations now more than ever. Successful crisis planning for cyber attacks requires cross-departmental cooperation from management, your IT teams, as well as your communication teams. The success of a cyber attack recovery plan hinges on the quality of your pre-event planning and an often overlooked element of cybersecurity attacks, which is the recovery phase. Before we begin today's discussion, we'll have some housekeeping. I'll start off with an introduction to today's panel experts, followed by a discussion on the topic. We will then have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. We are hopeful for some lively debate, so we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the session using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You don't have to wait till the Q&A session. You can do it as soon as we start. We will try to get through as many questions as possible in our time before we finish at 5 p.m. sharp. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce our panelists. I'm honored to be joined today by two leaders, and firstly, I would like to introduce Ginny Garn, who is Kaspersky's Head of Government Relations and Public Affairs for Asia Pacific. Ginny is responsible for developing trusted relations with institutional stakeholders for the company, while integrating the business, communications, and company's public policy strategies within Asia Pacific. Before Kaspersky, Ginny spent a significant time in public service as a government lawyer, as well as Singapore delegate to the United Nations General Assembly. We also have Puneet Singh, who is the Director of Communications Asia Pacific and Japan at Cisco. He leads corporate comms for the company in these markets, ensuring all comms are aligned to Cisco's purpose and business objectives. Prior to this, Puneet has extensive experience in journalism, having worked at ESPN and the BBC. Thank you, Ginny and Puneet, for joining us today. Ginny, a quick word before we get started.
For me, okay, I'll try to make this quick. First of all, of course, a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Rashid. Thank you, Sandpiper and PRCA for inviting me to share on this very important topic. We all know that cyber attacks are becoming increasingly prevalent. And of course, the damage done, we don't really have to rehearse this, is usually very costly for companies, for societies. And aware of this growing threat, we see more companies joining the fold to shore up their defenses against malicious actors. But with the evolving sophistication and growing frequency of cyber attacks, brands may still fall prey to an attack. And I suppose that's why we're here to talk about that today. So the question really is not if, but when a cyber incident may arise. So hope to be able to share some pointers and also discuss some thoughts today. And it is really critical to take PR and comms around cyber attacks seriously as a result, because, well, even as brands seek to fortify their key assets, right? And we all know that when it's not done right, the business implications can be serious. There are some statistics that my company had recently in our 2020 International Corporate IT Security Risk Survey. We found that 40% of financial losses following a cyber incident comes down to reputational damage. And this means that cyber attacks have enormous potential to damage the reputation of a business. Right, so So in the unfortunate event of a cyber attack, a brand's response can make or break the reputation. And to minimize that risk, I usually have 3 key considerations to bear in mind. I'll just very quickly touch on them, and we can, of course, elaborate on them a little bit later. So first, of course, is to restore trust, because trust is core to all business and personal relationships. It's a fundamental tenet of cybersecurity. And secondly, it is the need to strike the right balance, because we have finite resources and a ticking clock to take care of. So there can be conflicting priorities and interests to manage during a cyber attack, right? And of course, lastly, teams across all levels must be ready to manage the crisis. So it's about getting people prepared, getting the right people to be armed with the right skill set. So this sort of determines the speed and agility of a brand's response to a cyber attack and its efficacy as well. People always think that when a cyber attack happens, someone else in the company will deal with it. But I think response teams comprises not just of maybe the researchers or the IT people or senior management, but I think crisis management plan should take into consideration all staff and be clear of each and every staff's roles, and to be able to have a holistic approach to managing a crisis. So restore trust, strike the right balance, and to be ready with a plan. We can talk more about that later. Back to you, Rashid.
Thank you, Jeannie. Puneet, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Rashid. And just as Jeannie said, delighted to be here. So thank you to you, to Sandpiper and PRCA Southeast Asia for the opportunity. Jeannie summed it up. It is not a question of when, it's a question of, if. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when you get breached. I'll just give you a quick example of how big the challenge is. At Cisco, we have a threat intelligence engine which blocks 20 billion threat alerts a day for our clients. That's thinking. It's not a typo, it's 20 billion. And to put that in context, globally, the number of searches that are carried out on Google in a day are 6.5 billion. So 3 times more than total Google searches in a day is the number of alerts companies get in a day. That's the challenge they are up against, right? And like with any other crisis, with cybersecurity, it's not often the crisis that defines your success or failure, it's how you handle it. And when it comes to security especially, because there is such a huge myriad of stakeholders that get involved with cybersecurity, comms has to play a front and center role in making sure the response, the recovery of a company from a crisis is pretty well communicated. So look forward to an engaging discussion and shining a little bit more light on these things and learning from Ginny and everyone else through their questions. Back to you, Rashid.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you to both. I think it's a great summary. Puneet, I guess I'll kick things off starting with the basics, right? I think looking at crisis comms plans, everyone thinks about it. I guess now in recent months, when we have so many ransomware attacks, so many SMEs, so many different types of companies fall victims to these attacks. Can you just briefly tell us how important these sort of plans are? What are some of crisis comms must-haves?
Look, it's absolutely critical. Planning for a crisis situation of any sorts, and not least cybersecurity, is absolutely critical to the business, right? Just take a step back. By its very definition, crisis is a disruption of your normal state, right? And when a crisis happens, from a business perspective, as I said earlier, there is a whole gamut of stakeholders that get impacted, from your employees to your customers to your business partners, and increasingly government stakeholders, right? Everyone gets impacted. Things in a crisis by nature are always rapidly evolving. So while you may be reacting to one thing, something else may happen at the same time, and you may need to change your plans. And this is especially true if you've ever sat through a cybersecurity crisis. If you are fortunate enough, like Jeannie and myself, to work at a technology company that works with cybersecurity professionals, and you talk to them day in, day out for a living, and you see how they work, just the speed with which a cybersecurity incident evolves is absolutely phenomenal. And you are having to react to all of this in real time. Now, add to this mix two key things on the cybersecurity front, Rashid. One, increasingly in every country, there are now not just guidelines, there are actually regulations that businesses have to adhere to when there's a cyber attack and they are on the wrong end of it. Second, whether we like it or not, we have become an instant gratification society. Everything we want is at the touch of a button. Customers no longer have the patience to wait for lengthy downtimes. They want information now, whether it is good or bad. They will not wait for tomorrow morning's paper. They want to hear it now that this is happening. So that's why it is important to have a plan in place. So if you have to change things, if you have to react at a fast lightning speed, you at least have something to work from to build on that. So that's one. Second, very briefly to your thing on what are some of the must-haves. I think Ginny summed it up really, really well. I put it as 3 R's, which is pretty much the same thing as Ginny said. Number one is readiness. So which is the planning we said, you have to be ready. You have to simulate the exercises. You've got to simulate scenarios that you might find yourselves in. Second is you need to have a recovery and response plan. So there's a response plan. And third, as you mentioned briefly, Rashid, I think one of the most ignored aspects is the recovery phase. So how do you make yourself ready? How do you respond when you're eventually hit by it? And what's your plan to recover from it? I think those are the 3 things that every company has to think of, irrespective of their size.
Yes. And Jeannie, I guess if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Your thoughts on that as well? I think you summarized a few points in your opening speech, but just briefly on your point of view on crisis comms must-haves and in your experience working at Kaspersky, when you speak to your customers and your potential customers, can you tell us more?
Yeah, it sounds like a cliche, but there is wisdom in it. And in fact, just to also, as part of answering your question, I thought I could maybe elaborate a little bit more on my second point when I was making some of my brief opening remarks about striking a balance, because that all goes into part of the planning. So I think I was talking about, I think I mentioned finite resources and a ticking clock. So sometimes it's time sensitive when crisis hits. So how should resources be prioritized to resolve the incident while managing stakeholders, expectations, and maybe even the wider public for larger companies that have got the public to answer to, right? So, and what information should be shared with affected parties, how to best manage simultaneous demands around communicating with stakeholders. So I think finding that balance in line with the interests and values of your brand is to iron out possible tensions and conundrums even before a cyber attack occurs, which brings me to the other point that I made about, getting teams across all levels to be ready to manage the crisis. So that goes into the planning, because when a cyber attack happens, there is nothing worse than trying to figure out how to manage the crisis on the fly while it is ongoing. A thousand other things to worry about. And this is why an up-to-date crisis management plan should be part of a company strategy as well, so that you never get caught off guard. So like many things in business, a good plan can go a long way. We've established that. A communications response plan should be robust to handle breaches with varying levels of impact. And we tell people that. In other words, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Different strokes for different folks, different strategies work for different organizations. And it's really up to each organization to find a strategy that best works for them. One way to do so is important to stress test the plan through simulated scenarios, which we always advise people to do, to find a balance between competing interests and to prepare everyone involved. So you can draw inspiration from real life case studies, which we are not short of, to craft these scenarios. And for instance, a new breed of hackers are coming out with apolitical stances. They define their goal to be strictly business, money, with no government affiliations. All that they are in for is money, 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 and what would be an appropriate communications response if that hits your company, in the case of a ransomware attack, for instance. So your communications plan, in short, should be as detailed as possible. And it means, of course, pre-identifying possible, best communication channel for different purposes, and the appointed main communicator to affected parties, for example, may or may not be your head of communications, may or may not be your CEO. It's more about who gets activated as spokesperson depends on the gravity of the problem, who's the best person with the right expertise to address the problem. And lastly, and most importantly also, all relevant parties within the company should be involved and trained and be in touch with what's going on. They include your info security folks, your IT folks, your legal, your customer support, and your corp comms folks, from the technical teams all the way to the board of directors or even the chairman. So everyone must be clear of their roles and should always be ready to be activated when needed. So that's my, sorry, lengthy answer.
That's perfect. I think it leads nicely into my next point of discussion. I want to touch a bit more about the different stakeholders that have to come together when you're putting together this crisis comms plan. I think both of you touched a little bit on that, but who's really in charge? Or is the question, is there anyone really in charge? Or do you see this as a work across many different departments coming together? Maybe the PRA comms team can take the lead, but we would definitely need input from many different departments as well, right, Jenny?
Yeah, definitely. It's not, so who's really in charge really depends on the industry, depends on the particular cyber attack, and depends on how equipped your people are. So which is why a lot of times, and of course, if your company already has pre-appointed spokespersons, which the larger companies tend to have already, so those would be your people, the people that you should go to, who are ready to sort of understand what the company position is generally on most things, even if not specifically for the particular situation at hand, so that whatever that they say is usually aligned with the general principles that the company follows. Yeah,
so it's like it takes a whole village to put a quick crisis comms plan together. Puneet, you run comms for Cisco across many different markets. I would say it would probably be the same answer. Who do you look at when you're putting those your Cisco's crisis comms plans together?
I would say it is a pretty much similar approach for every company in terms of looking at things. One key thing that one has to remember for cybersecurity incidents especially is they are a different breed of crisis than something other. For example, and if you look at, let's say you're a manufacturing plant and you've had a machinery breakdown, right? And you can't deliver your orders for a week. Now it's a pretty simple, it's a crisis for a company. You've got committed orders, selling to people who are then selling to people who are then using that machinery somewhere. But it's a very clear-cut scenario of my machinery has broken down. There's a technical issue. I know I need to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
In a cyber attack situation, it takes a while for companies to, one, fully understand the scale to which the attack has happened. It takes a while to understand the origin of the attack. It takes a while to understand till what level have people penetrated your IT infrastructure, what they might already have had accessed, what they might have walked away with for now. So back to Jeannie's point, that is why when you do simulation exercises for cyber attacks, every single team has to be involved. And based on incident to incident, as she said, the person in charge or the department in charge might completely change on who's calling the shots, who's deciding what the approach is going to be. Sometimes you're going to have to go out and say everything right at the front. Sometimes the comms team may be under pressure to say things, but the IT team, for absolutely genuine reasons, may be telling you, you can't say anything which we just don't know it, right? So it's a completely different breed to handle. That's why the simulation exercises are so important. So every stakeholder understands what's happening when this happens in a real world scenario, and they're not caught off guard.
Puneet is right, and in fact, sometimes also, if I can add,
Sure.
The thing that the first spokesperson goes out to say could be that something has happened. We don't know what exactly yet, but we're checking. but don't worry, we're on it 24/7. We'll come
Yeah.
back later on with something. So that sort of, I mean, it's really about, do your stakeholders hear it first from you or from the news? Yeah. So sometimes it can be as simple as that, even if you don't have the immediate answers or the details yet.
Yeah. I think a great example, I think, is in the aviation sector. I'm a big aviation fan, and I follow a lot of the news from different airlines. And obviously, when unfortunate incidents happen, like for Malaysia Airlines as well as Air Asia, they'll put out a tweet, encouraging people not to speculate because this is, investigations are still ongoing. And then they will probably update them further down the line with more concrete info. I think this leads nicely into our my second point about transparency. We talk a lot about many different stakeholders coming together to build up that plan. But then, for example, if something actually happens, how much do we share? When do we share? There's this really interesting article I read recently about a 2011 RSA cyber attack. That almost crippled their network. The hackers took over RSA systems and stole that. The secret keys of the secure ID two-factor devices, I think a lot of corporate folks use them to log into their computers. Yeah. I think you will see a slide on your screen now. But what stood out for me was how Art Coviello, which is RSA's CEO at that time, how he reacted. I'm going to read a quote of the article for you, and I'm sure you can see it on the screen now. RSA's executives debated how to go public. One person in legal suggested that they didn't actually need to tell their customers. Coviello slammed a fist on the table. They would not only admit to the breach, he insisted, but get on the phone with every single customer to discuss how those companies protect themselves. Jeannie, I'll start with you in regards to full transparency. It's really so crucial. But how do PR and comms teams approach this tactfully, right? You spoke about it's so important that the first message you put out there has to be very, very careful. How transparent do we need to be to manage a situation like that?
Good question. And thanks for sharing about RSA's incident on the slide. I think that's a recent example which most people are familiar with. So in the event of a cyber attack, clients will want to know what information has been compromised as soon as possible. Is it information to do with me, or to do with others, or to do with your company? That has an implication on me, right?
Yeah.
Well, like I said earlier, consumers today expect accountability, and we cannot run away from that. And of course, RSA was well aware of that. If I could sort of maybe distill 3 key tips for incident management, also touching on transparency and all that, and drawing from the RSA case study, would be first, and I've alluded to this earlier on, first, take responsibility, right? I've said this before, I always believe in addressing the elephant in the room. Rather than kicking the can further down the road. The art of PR is also how you communicate it, right? So if the company was responsible, there were lapses, admit it. Don't blame the cyber attackers to avoid a sticky scenario where the vulnerability was found to be caused by a lapse in the company's practices, right? So be sincere. It's really one thing to make a mistake. It's quite another to make a mistake and not admit it. And then worst part is you completely lose credibility when it gets found out later on. And my second point is, of course, I think we need to be as specific as we can and as much as we know. So when disclosing information, say exactly what happened, how it stakeholders and what the brand is doing about it. If information is unavailable at the moment, then stay so, right? And this gives people the confidence that remedial actions are underway and go some way to restoring trust, actually. And of course, lastly, I like to be quite complete, so I would recommend covering all bases. I think it's important to reach out to all affected parties to the best of your ability. Release a public statement. Calling every single customer, while resources intensive, also goes a long way in rebuilding that trust that was lost because of the lapse to begin with. And it serves as a point of contact also for those who are affected. They feel that they've got someone over the human and warm body to reach out to, right?
Yeah.
So the combination of the personal and the public approaches ensures that no one is left in the dark about the breach and everyone was completely clear on the next steps. And the last thing you want really is your most important people, your customers, to hear about this from the news, and which sort of goes back to my earlier point about taking responsibility. Yeah.
Puneet, I'm sure you would have quite a bit of experience or stories to share as well. How do we manage that? Like, you know, being transparent is important. I think both of you agree with me on that. But how do we do it carefully, tactfully, so that, you know, it doesn't hurt us in the long run?
I have a lot of stories. I'm not sure how many of them can be shared in a public forum. But look, I 100% agree with Jeannie. Look, they will just the nature of the industry, and I know I'm repeating myself. If you worked in the industry, you will realize that just the nature of this industry is cyber attacks evolve. Things change very rapidly. You find new things with every passing hour as you try to contain it and mitigate the impact on your business. Sometimes companies find out that they've actually been breached and lost something months after it happened because someone discovered it. It's just surprising to a lot of people externally, but you talk to a cybersecurity practitioner, they won't even blink an eye if you told someone a company found out after 3 months. They say, okay, it's just run-of-the-mill stuff. They were breached by really good hackers. The one thing you need to always remember is transparency is key, but you have to find the right balance between what Jeannie said, admitting responsibility, and then when going out with information on what you can share and need to share, is 100% certain that you are fully certain about what you're going to go out and disclose is the right thing, and you're not just going down the wrong path, being led down the wrong path, sorry. So that's one thing. And I would add just one more thing to what Jeannie said, is I think the regulatory aspect of it is a critical factor in deciding what you say and when you can say it. Sometimes you are bound by regulation to instantaneously disclose some stuff, and sometimes it inhibits you from doing it because you have to let the regulator know first, and you want to go to the regulator when you found enough to go and report that. So multitude of factors, but transparency is the key. When you're ready to disclose, you should do it right away, then wait for it.
Oh, it's a very good point, Puneet. I think you brought up also, I guess it's also depend on your customer or the customer in question that has gone through that attack, because, for example, they might have their own systems in place, and they might, you know, maybe they have to inform internal stakeholders first, stuff like that. So I think that's.
I'll give you an example, not of a cyber attack, but I think one that probably everyone on this call remembers. Volkswagen's Dieselgate scenario. I don't think fudging the data hurt them as much as the fact that the entire senior management knew for years that this was happening, right? So just that impact of hiding stuff while having known about it, it hurts the brand more than, oh, they did something wrong. As Jeannie said, you making a mistake is one thing, but hiding it and then blaming someone for else for it is just calling, you know, disastrous consequences on yourself as a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on a completely different example. I will have a quote up on the screen shortly as well. This time from Tim Doak. So Tim was the VP of Comms for American Airlines on September 11, 2001. In a recent LinkedIn post, Tim shared quite a heartfelt recollection of what happened on that fateful day. I'm just going to read a few sentences out here that speaks about how the airline managed transparency after such a crisis, externally as well as internally, in a very delicate situation. Our crisis manual never contemplated having our own aircraft hijacked and used as armed missiles against our own country. The FBI sent agents to our command center to ensure compliance, insisting we refer all media calls to the FBI. Since we couldn't communicate with the public through the media, we devised a plan to use our CEO's employee hotline to record messages to our workforce, knowing full well that the reporters had the phone number and could easily listen to these messages. We felt an obligation to keep our employees informed, especially with the entire airline system in complete shutdown and disarray, but we obeyed the order not to interact with the media. Look, I guess the point here is that even in working in an agency, whenever we try and advise our clients, we always talk about what we want to say externally. We always think about, oh, okay, let's put together a few paragraphs, responses that we can go to public with, we can tweet about, we can share on our LinkedIn and Facebook page. But it's equally important to make sure that the internal audience, your own colleagues, they know that the message is going to be as accurate as possible. After all, these employees are your walking advocates of the brand. How important, Jeannie, I'm just going to start with you again. How important is this to make sure that whatever you say externally, you also put thought about what you want to say internally? And when do you do it? Do you speak to internal teams first? Do you notify your colleagues first, or you go to the public first, or you do it at the same time? I was just going to add, the team's example is quite difficult, right? I mean, going through what they went through for September 11, it's just really, really difficult. But if we take a step back and we look at cybersecurity breaches to our own companies, who do we go to first, and how important it is for your internal audience, your own colleagues?
So starting from from Tim's example, so in unprecedented scenarios like 911 and other crises, we rely on the collective efforts of everyone in the company to pull through the storm, right? And it is a storm, and I always advocate having all hands on deck. And some people even cross-hatching beyond their peacetime roles. All staff really need to know what's going on. So clear and transparent internal messaging is crucial to sail through that storm. It ensures consistency also in external communication at all levels, and most importantly, facilitates smooth internal coordination when everyone is on the same page and work towards the same goals in resolving the problem and communicating that problem. So of course, we need systems in place to ensure that smooth flow of information. Which means that during peace times, every company should minimally try to structure their different functions and departments in a way that they don't work in silos, that there are always open chain of communications. Something important is triggered. The information flow is quick, efficient. And these systems cannot be developed overnight. So it has to be developed during peacetime. Time is required to develop, test, fine-tune, learn these systems and review and to modify. So it goes back to the earlier theme we were discussing on planning. I think, yeah, those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Puneet, what about you? I think quite a number of employees in Cisco across the whole region. How do you get that message across? And if you could elaborate as well in terms of timing, Jeannie, please feel free to jump in as well. Who do we go to first? External, internal at the same time, and how do we actually do it?
I would say internal first.
Okay.
Because one simple reason, internal first, but just a little bit of time between where you communicate internally with when you're ready to announce this externally. It should not be like hours in advance that you're waiting to announce externally and then everyone internally already knows, because it's going to leak. We all know how this works. But internal first for two reasons. At the end of the day, for every company, yes, the employees are there, the partners are there, the government is there, and stakeholders are there. Your number one asset is your employees. Your number one duty is towards your employees. Employees is what make a company. They should be hearing what's happening in a company first before anyone else. That's the number one premise. Number two, in a crisis scenario, especially one that becomes public, remember the employees have their own networks. Employees will go home. Employees will talk to other people. Their families will talk to them. Their friends will ask them, hey, I heard about a breach in your company and 500,000 people's credit card details were stolen, right? If they don't know what has happened, what's their response going to be? Hey, I haven't heard much about it. I don't know how they're handling it. Now imagine the domino effect this has. One person speaks to 5 people saying, I don't know. Those 5 people say, that company is no good at handling crisis. I spoke to 3 employees and all of them said they have no idea what's going on. Clearly, they have no clue. This was meant to happen to them, even if it was a genuine, simple mistake. So if your employees know exactly what's happening, even if it is the same information that you're disclosing outside, not everyone needs to know every single detail, but at least they know what's happened, where you are with it, what's the next step. If every employee in the company understands that, they will act as your advocates, and they will help cushion the impact on the end audience. So I would always say internal first,
followed by external.
Hmm.
Yeah. I just on that thought as well. When you look at PR and comms teams, and they are developing responses, in as soon as something bad happens, how do we look at what kind? Are we all in agreement that the information is same or similar, or do we give a little bit more detail to our internal audience as compared to members of the media? Jeannie, you want to take that first?
Well, we obviously need to tell our family members the whole story, right?
Yeah.
So this is really just purely intuitive. But then again, comms is always, sometimes I say quite commonsensical as well. So I would tell my family, my nuclear family first, obviously the full story. And then I would tell it to the external in a way that addresses their concern.
The main concern. Yeah.
For example, if it is a data leak incident, clearly, from a telco, for instance, let's just say, okay, if I'm addressing the subscribers, hundreds of thousands or millions of users, obviously the user, if I'm a user, what would you be? If you were the user, what would you be interested to know? Whether you're affected, right?
Yeah.
And how much, and what exactly, how much data has been leaked, right? So which aspect of the entire set of data is leaked? Or is it the whole thing, right? So you would want to know, and then immediately also to know, and more importantly, the next question you will ask as a user would be that, okay, and what are you guys doing about it? And then, so your communication to the external would therefore have to also address that, right? So I would say it doesn't mean that by not saying everything, you are being less honest. It's not true. You still are, but you're giving them exactly what they need. Get to the point, because everyone might possibly be in a state of panic, or and also to not give the media too much leeway to make stories
or speculate
out of unimportant details.
Puneet, do you think if I say that we have to treat internal and external audiences almost similar in terms of what we say, right? I think journalists now are getting very smart. Like if they don't get a response from the team, you can easily go on LinkedIn and reach out to your people working in a company, or someone knows someone, and they could easily get that kind of information. Do you feel that that sort of difference is not really there? Like what we say is kind of similar, but is just in a different tone.
I would say the key word is exactly what Jeannie said. Common sense. There's always, when you're handling a crisis comms, right? We've got all comms people on this on this call.
Yeah.
When you're handling a crisis comms, there's always a core group of people that is sitting together huddling. Yes, there are all hands on deck and everyone's chipping in, but there's a core central team that's huddled together and that's looking at every single aspect of how this is going to affect. I'll just build on Jeannie's example. You're a telco, you've lost data of, let's say, hypothetically 500,000 people. Those 500,000 people want to know what's been lost, who's taken it, and what do I need to do? And what are you doing to make sure there is no bad effect on me? They need to know three things simply. What have you lost? What do I need to do? And what are you doing? That's all they need. However, the core team that is sitting there is then also discussing, what does this mean from a regulatory standpoint? Are we going to get any financial implications on our business? Is there a possibility of someone suing us? Are we likely to lose subscribers? Is there a fine involved from the telecom authority of that particular country? And if it is, what is the scale of that fine? Is it $1 per subscriber? Is it $10 per subscriber per data set that we have lost? A lot of those discussions are happening. Now, what you want to do is, if you're going out to the media to say, we've been breached and we've lost data of 500,000 subscribers, but no financial information has been lost, only the name and telephone numbers have been lost. And we are looking into it, right? Hypothetically. You need to tell your staff the same thing, because they need to know, because they can't be hearing. You can't be telling your staff, we can't tell you this, right?
Yeah.
But you can't then, in the same email to your internal staff, say, we've lost data for X 100,000 people. We are also discussing what it means, financial implications. It looked like there may be fines involved between anywhere between $500,000 to $5 million. That information will get leaked, and the staff doesn't need to know that, right? So you have to share the information, but there has to be a common sense approach to it. Who needs to know what, and where does it get? Because we all comms people tell everyone, any internal email is as good as an external email. It will leak. Now, you can type in bold and red and font 72 for internal use only. It will make its way to a journalist's inbox. So common sense. I'm glad Jeannie said that word. That's going to become my mantra.
So look, in our discussions, we've covered what PR teams should do before, all about planning, and then during, managing transparency, looking at what you say externally and to internal audience. Now I want to talk about after, and I think this is where obviously us agency folks are always active in, right? But I think I guess how important is the recovery period? Look, if you look at a bar chart, everything happens at the start, and then there'll be a point when, okay, we've gone public, we've acknowledged the problem, now we are moving ahead. So obviously your IT team, sales teams, everyone's fixing the problem, engineers are busy. But what can PR and comms do? Would you go to journalists, maybe offer an exclusive to Business Times? Hey, look, this is what we're doing. We've learned from this lesson. This is what we are doing, and you quickly want to move forward. Are there any stories you want to tell? Acknowledging the issue? Yes, we want to acknowledge it, but we don't want to keep acknowledging and talking about it. We want to talk about what we were going to do next and what the outlook is like. So I guess the recovery period, again, so crucial to any company if they are coming out of a breach. Puneet, I'm going to start with you in terms of recovery. What do you see would be the key points that you would recommend? Do we go immediately with an exclusive with a friendly journalist, or you be a bit more strategic and maybe do more internal comms, update your blogs and stuff like that?
I would go with the latter. The former can backfire, especially if it's too soon and things haven't been addressed. And worst case, the end customers who got impacted by a cyber attack haven't seen or been communicated to directly. So I would actually say warm bodies, figure out with the business what has happened since the attack, what have we changed, what have we done, and how are we helping mitigate the impact on the customers or whatever stakeholder got impacted by the cyber attack. I would rather reach out to them directly and kind of highlight the steps that the company has taken to, one, mitigate the impact of the current incident, and two, then improve their overall security posture, practices, and processes to make sure the risk of something similar happening has been brought down significantly. They should hear it first. Once that has happened, then is the time to kind of do a little bit of a media blitz if there is still appetite to do a exclusive interview here or there. I would not recommend doing it the other way around.
Good point. Jeannie, in your experience working with different clients, different customers, do you feel the same way? Is there, how important is PR and comms after an attack?
People say that time will heal, right?
Depends on the situation, actually.
Yeah, it depends on. I was just thinking. So while time may erase the memory of a crisis from public consciousness, I think the work is only beginning, usually in the aftermath. So in the recovery phase, as you have called it, most, if not all, companies should be reviewing processes, systems, vulnerabilities, what went wrong, and to figure out how to prevent it for the future. This process does take time, as with all things, but in turn makes for a PR opportunity to assure stakeholders that the company continues to learn and to improve, to get better from any breach. So I think I would advocate actively sharing the steps that were taken and how it's taken, the progress that's made, and the improvements that are in place already. And this will hopefully go quite some way to restoring that public trust that was perhaps lost in the first place. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. We are 15 minutes away from 5 p.m. I think we should jump straight into the Q&A. I have seen quite a few questions coming up. I think let's just start if I just quickly pull up a few. I think the first one is for Jeannie. What are some ways for companies to prepare staff across all departments to handle a comms crisis? And I think it's to Jeannie, but Puneet, please jump in if you have any additional feedback. Both of you mentioned about planning, rehearsing. Is there anything more than that?
Okay, yeah, I'll take it first. I think it is important for the comms team to have a thorough understanding of the cyber incident landscape. So that's how, well, comms people sometimes need to know a bit of cyber issues to understand the tools for communication, encryption during a cyber incident, and hands-on experience. No one can really be 100% prepared to handle a crisis, unfortunately, just like how none of us were prepared for COVID, right?
Yeah.
So this is no exception, and it helps to be guided by people with experience. So speak to your researchers, really helps. If you are not from a cyber security company, speak to a cybersecurity expert company that is able to help you. So in 2015, Kaspersky was a victim of an advanced persistent threat called Duku 2.0, right? And we are a cybersecurity company. And lessons learned from that experience were then incorporated into our very own incident communication plan. A little bit of shameless plug here, but we believe, we do believe in supporting the industry to combat cyber attacks, and have thus extended our incident communication package to businesses as well, which includes keynote presentation, a tailored workshop, feedback on gaps in your crisis management plan. So together, hopefully these will enable companies to produce and to refine their own cybersecurity incident communication plan to be more ready to respond to any incident. So sorry, Jeannie. So I was just going to add that, look, I think the message is to make sure that we look at that document as a work in progress, right? Constantly being updated all the time. Puneet, maybe you can add a bit about rehearsals. I think you both mentioned that, you know, we need to do sort of mock situations throughout the year. How often should that be? Or
I would say at least scenario planning once every 6 months, if not often, if not more regularly, right? Companies should be looking at different scenarios. I do want to underline what Jeannie said about understanding of cybersecurity terminology at comms levels. Because the last thing you want is being involved in responding to a cybersecurity incident and sitting there in a room full of different departments and someone saying, we've just had a denial of service attack, and you're just saying, can someone tell me what that means to begin with? So just some basic level of understanding should be there. And then just the rehearsals. And rehearsals can be, you know, can throw up a lot of different things that you need to address. It's not just about addressing your messaging. It's not just about understanding how you're going to respond, how quickly you need to write. You will also eventually, the simulation exercises, the ones that I have found most helpful in my career, two things have come up. They kind of show you which team members don't handle pressure really well. If you've been in a newsroom, you will know that there are people who can do breaking news because something happens and they need to put out 3 lines within 30 seconds because that's their KPI and they can do it. And there are others who would literally freeze if they had to do something in 30 seconds. So it gives you an understanding of who within your comms team can handle that level of pressure. So, you know, nothing to take away from their skill set. They may be really good at something else. It doesn't make them a lesser professional. It's just that they're not suited to doing crisis work because not everyone is. And number 2, this also applies for spokespeople. In my agency days, when we used to do crisis simulation exercises, I will not name names. There were a couple of really senior execs who literally froze in the middle of a simulation exercise. Now imagine what would happen if they were in a real world scenario. And that's where you kind of decide, is this the real, is this the person we actually want to put in front of the media when something really happens? So I think it's equally important from those aspects as well, to continue to rehearse these things.
Great. There's another one, interesting one. I think you can take this. What is your advice for smaller organizations like SMEs? I think this is a good question. We have a lot of SMEs in this region. They don't have the luxury of resources. How should their comms team plan for a situation like this?
That's a tough one, I would say, because SMEs to begin with don't even have the luxury of resources and for the right cybersecurity technologies in place. So that makes them a big prime target. People are very surprised actually how big a target are SMEs for hackers. I would say from a communications point of view, I would say treat it like you would treat the technology aspect. So when your tech teams are doing simulation exercises to understand what technology do they need, how do they need to beef up, and if they are outsourcing, from a comms point of view, if an SME doesn't have a big comms team like a company like Cisco or a Microsoft or any other big large multinational corporation would have, my advice would be, if you have a small team, make sure you're spending the peacetime to identify the right agency partners that you may want to work with, and that they understand your business. And I hate to say this, but your agency on retainer for your day-to-day brand building may always not be the right agency to give you the crisis comm support. They may not have the right team in place. So at Cisco, this is what I do. We are a large company. We carry out audits of all our agencies in the region from a crisis capability point of view, saying, is this the right agency partner for us to work with? Should we have any sort of a crisis? Most of the time, the answer is yes. But in certain markets, the answer is no. Then you go on the hunt to look for the right partner so that you have them onboarded in the system. They know you, you know them. There is some kind of a arrangement in place so that you can kind of trigger on a relationship literally at the flick of a switch. That would be my advice.
Jeannie, I'm sure you at Kaspersky, you guys also work with many different company types, company sizes, in different regions. Any advice for SMEs, especially our comms teams?
Well, my observations are similar to Puneet's. So SMEs can be very vulnerable as well. So as a result, they sometimes get caught and not know what to do when this hits, largely because they do not have in-house teams. They're not equipped. So I do agree with Puneet, and I would give the same answer. Basically, identify the right agency partners to work with. You have to go through a very thorough selection process during peacetime. Maybe engage them on an ad hoc project base kind of a basis to sort of test them a little bit and see how much they can flow with you and really very quickly understand and digest and be able to turn the information that you give them into something real that they can help you with when it comes to communication. So test them during peacetime when you have the luxury of time to do so, and then I think they would be your first port of call when well, if crisis does
happens. I think we may have time for one or maybe two questions. I see this. This one is quite interesting. I think both of you can take turns to discuss this. If there is something not to disclose about a cyber attack, what would that be? I'm opening up to the floor. Anyone want to start?
Maybe I'll take that question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because first of all, what not to say shouldn't be a key concern. The primary considerations for companies should be thinking from a user point of view, like I said before, using the telco example, and how to ensure trust and accountability. So a level of discretion is important, particularly on when sensitive personal data is involved. So for instance, we should not disclose, when anything beyond what the privacy laws allow us to. And of course, as we discussed earlier, it's also important to ensure that the organization complies with the relevant rules and regulations of the day, PDPA and all that. And this may sometimes determine what we can or cannot say legally. So that would be my response. That's really because I'm trained as a lawyer, so I tend to be a bit more careful.
Puneet, so you joined from the dark side, right? As a journalist going to comms.
I tell everyone, people who tell me you joined the dark side, I tell all my former journalist colleagues, no, I haven't. No, I'm not at the dark side. You just haven't seen the light at the end of the tunnel. You just need to cross it. You just have the courage to cross it. You know, I agree with Jeannie. I'll add one more thing about what not to say, and this is just because I'm lucky enough to work at a company that does cybersecurity, you know, as a business practice. Is you will find it really tough if you talk to a cybersecurity professional and ask them, can we say where most attacks are originating from? They get very fidgety about saying we'll pin this down on this particular geographical location, because by nature hackers are very good at masquerading where they've originated it from originally. So when you are at the wrong end of a cyber incident, usually media would want to know. They will throw in a question: do you know which country this attack originated from? Because we all know the love for state actors amongst journalists, right? I would highly advise to steer away from that conversation because it doesn't add any value to what's happened as a result of the attack. You still have to deal with the fallout on that. So that would be one thing not to say.
Thank you. Jeannie, anything you want to add to that?
No.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah. Look, I think we should wrap up. Thank you, Puneet and Jeannie. Thank you so much. We are already approaching 5 p.m. And I would like to say thank you to both of you again for your insights and giving us time of day. I think we shared some interesting aspects, interesting points for us comms folk to sort of sit back and understand and then maybe revise our own crisis comms plans. I would also like to thank our audience for some great questions and your attention as well. I wish everyone a great day ahead and thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Rashid. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashid.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you, everyone. Take care very much. Bye.